Hello and welcome to Pointed Logic Tarot. Today is going to be an in-depth book review of 78 Acts of Liberation, Tarot to Transform Our World by Lane Smith. I have spent quite a bit of time with this book, both reading it but then also using it in a deck study, like going through each card meaning along with a deck. And I've also been sitting down and taking some notes on it, which I just finished the notes today and wanted to hurry up and film this so I could pass it along as a gift to a friend who I think would really enjoy it. I have my journal here because of the notes, so I will be referring to those. And I think to start off, I'll give a very short and sweet summary of my thoughts in case an in-depth book review is not your cup of tea or what you're looking for today. Overall, I would rank this book very highly. I would rank it 4.5 out of 5 stars probably. I think it's essential reading for modern tarot readers. I think there are some quirks about it that some people may struggle with or not like. And when I say quirks, I mean literally just like the format of the book. But that overall it's got incredible, expansive ideas on the meanings of each card. It's nearly its own tarot system, I would argue, which I will get into. It has an incredible section on tarot history. And I would encourage folks, because I have heard on some tarot tubers channels this idea of like, I don't want any negativity and politics into my videos or into my life, etc., or into my tarot practice. I would encourage you to look at politics not equivalent to negativity. Like, there's a lot of negativity in politics, but everything is politics when you think about the psychology of our society as a whole. And this is a very hopeful, empowering outlook on politics that I encourage folks worried about politics and negativity to investigate and take a look at with an open mind. And if nothing else, if you take this book, the main thing to read would be the meanings of each card. Those are where the meat of the book is and where it really shines. Okay, so that's my like overall unspoilered, or like, I don't know what you'd call it, just like general summary of a 4.5 out of 5 book. Really great. I really am appreciative of Lane Smith for writing this. They did an excellent job. So now let's jump into the structure of the book and my thoughts and like my 2 very minor critiques. So it's sectioned out into 2 parts, plus an introduction. Do not skip the introduction. It's really helpful in setting the context of the book. You can read it, I would argue you can read it kind of out of order if you want. So this chunk is great as, you know, reading it straight through all in one piece. But if you want to jump around, you can just jump right into the card meanings and sort of dig into Mixter Smith's perspective on how the card meanings and the numerology fit liberation. The tarot structure and readings would be very helpful in informing the format of the book, but otherwise you could just jump into the cards and come back to the foundation if you really wanted to. But I do recommend reading the history of tarot as one piece, like there's several small sections within that. Okay, so let's just jump right in. Something that immediately resonated with me is on page 2, Lane Smith talks about experiencing a lot of frustration at the impopularity of doing inner work. Here it is. I've both witnessed and personally experienced a lot of frustration around the fact that the increased popularity of doing inner work hasn't led more people to do more significant or sustained outer work in the realm of social justice. That sentence means a lot to me because I too have felt like, well, the inner work is essential. I'm excited people are getting into it. I'm really excited to see a lot of more self-reflection in the world, whether it's spiritual or not, or through tarot or not. I do want to see that translated into outer action, and I don't see that. And it's a hard, hurdle to step over for some. So, I understand, but appreciated that and some examples in here. Something that's really, one of the best sort of framings of the whole book is the concept of power and power structures. What I really like is it talks about the concepts of power in a very witch way, so skeptical, atheist, science-seeking, without the requirement of occult knowledge. It talks about the power of the occult and then saying there's other ways we can use understanding power and aligning it with tarot. This little paragraph or section on power really informs the entire way that Lane Smith is interpreting the cards. And then when I use the word politics, what I mean is simply one's understanding of how power operates in society and how one believes that power should be used. And that's why I encourage folks who don't really want to get political, quote unquote, to still give this book a listen or a read. And I am not one typically to blanket recommend any kind of book because all books work for some people, but no one book works for everyone. But this one, I really, really, really encourage folks, even those not certain if they would be really into it, to give it a read, or at least, start dipping your toes into the cards. Okay. Let's go to page 10 here. We're still in the introduction. Under politics, activism, spirituality and politics. So this whole section is really interesting to me. It talks about how you can take your politics and your spirituality and use them in tandem. You can mirror each other with them. It talks about how conservatives and indeed fascists put their spiritual beliefs and their political agenda together. But for a lot of us, and I'm included in this, we kind of push spirituality aside and say, no, that's something foolish or not grounded in research or fact-based, so I don't want to touch it. And I found this section really helpful talking about that. So, for example, here, in my experience, some leftist activists have scoffed at spirituality and religion, citing Karl Marx's statement that religion is the opiate of the people. But you can use your spirituality to build your resilience while you navigate the politics of the world. And that's something that really is helpful to me and one of the ways I use tarot. And so I really liked that section. I really appreciated that mix. Do y'all say mix or mixter when you use MX? I would love to hear what people's thoughts are. I think for when I read about a person who says that they identify as more trans-masc, I tend to use mixter, and then when they identify as trans femme and still use mix, or anyone who uses it, I'll just say mix. But would love thoughts from folks on the etiquette around pronunciating MX. But anyway, I appreciated Lane Smith's About Me section because it really gives you context on their background and their worldview. And it informs how they look at things and gives you perspective, and also helps you remember that your worldview and your upbringing and your life experience impacts your perspective as well and helps you be more aware of that, which I liked. The next thing that I really liked, of course, is the critical history of tarot. This is just good. I think this is essential reading. The one thing I would say about it or critique is that you need to think critically or read critically when you're reading through what Lane Smith talks about as speculation versus as historical knowledge or historical information that we have or historical accounts, because Smith does do some speculating in here that I think is really important to not conflate the two and say, okay, everything in here is factual history. It might be, but some of it is inference, and an issue with history in general is conflating the historian's hypotheses with their actual known information. But I did really like how Lane Smith talks about, that we tend to value... Oh, where does it say that? I want to read that little sentence to y'all. Okay, here it is. White Europeans tend to demand proof of such connection in the form of written records and artifacts. Meanwhile, those are exactly the items that have been destroyed in European conquests. Oral histories and cultural traditions are treated as less verifiable and reliable, when those are the only things that cannot be robbed from people who have been persecuted, colonized, and enslaved. So I liked that Mr. Smith highlighted seeking out both written and cultural records. So that was really cool to see. I liked the inclusion talking about the Romani people and how there's this intertwined history with them and with tarot, but debate and denial by mostly like white folks that there is a link. And like, yes, it's not exactly clear, but what is clear is that before the typical history that you hear of, like rich royal or like wealthy families in Italy invented tarot, and then eventually it went to the masses, and then it became used for divination by French occultists and then British occultists. That's like what you typically hear. But this talks a lot about how, look, folk witchcraft, folk cartomancy, and divination practices existed well beyond that. Why would tarot cards be any different from other cards and not be used in this way? It's a lot harder for paper cards to survive that length of time. And it just talks about the Roma and their magical practices and how those are appropriated. So anyway, it's really interesting. And I really like the perspective. Another, as I was reading it, I was thinking on another resource that I really appreciated for the history of tarot, and that was in the book Tarot for Pregnancy, which I ended up giving away, and I kind of wish I still had for that specifically, just that chapter. But then Lane Smith actually mentioned it in here as well, which I thought was cool. And recommends it in the same section I do, which is that it is really important when learning about Mamluk cards and the evolution of those traveling to Europe and evolving into tarot, another game that was also likely another tool for cartomancy, even well before the documented occultists wrote all their books and all of their like tarot is magic from Egypt kind of stuff. Something else that I really want to flag in this history section is the discussion on appropriation of Jewish mysticism, which I think is really important and valuable. And a quote that I specifically liked is from, here it is. So I'm going to try my best I should have looked up the pronunciation of this name prior to reading this section. But Gershom Scholem, a German-born Jewish philosopher and historian, had a book on Kabbalah and wrote, "The activities of French and English occultists contributed nothing and only served to create considerable confusion between the teachings of the Kabbalah and their totally unrelated inventions, such as the alleged Kabbalistic origins of tarot cards. To this category of supreme charlatanism belong many and widely read books of," and then it lists some, Eliphas Levi, which is Alphonse Louis Constant, Pepas, which is Gerard Ancaus, and Frater Perdurabo, Aleister Crowley, all of whom had an infinitesimal knowledge of Kabbalah that did not prevent them from drawing freely on their imaginations instead. And a lot of where there's any kind of links to the Kabbalah in tarot have been placed there by the occultists and mostly made up, not even actually related to real Jewish mysticism. So I want to flag that. And also, indeed, it talks about Crowley, who referred to Jewish people as parasites, who had hateful epithets about Jewish, Black, Indigenous, and Asian peoples, and had his overt sympathy of fascism. Which is kind of why I want nothing to do with any of the Crowley teachings. But just flagging that's really good context for folks, because it's kind of a modern debate still, which I am a little bit surprised it's still a debate. And then there's a really useful resource listed down here by Ezra Rose. Fuck Your Magic, Anti-Semitism, A Lesser Key to the Appropriation of Jewish Magic and Mysticism. And it's a resource with questions. If you, as a non-Jew, truly feel called to Jewish magic and mysticism, can you study it and appreciate it without claiming it as your own practice? Have you talked with Jews about Judaism? What would it mean to build real relationships and participate as a guest in Jewish culture? And then Lane Smith adds, we might ask these same questions about any culture that we do not belong to but take inspiration from. Roma, Asian, Arab, Muslim, Black diasporic, indigenous cultures. And with Asian, there's a slew of cultures in there. Yoga, for example, that's incorporated into tarot and just incorporated into popular culture. Just tons of things. I Ching, anyway, those questions are critical to ask about any spirituality or mysticism or religion that you are being exposed to and interested in that is not your own. So definitely take a look at this resource that's also listed here and ask yourself those questions about the various practices that you are intrigued by. Okay. Woo. It also, back to the folk witchcraft, I forgot this in my notes. It includes important notes on the concurrent witch trials with folk witchcraft and cartomancy, which is another reason likely that there's not a ton of information on the tarot itself in cartomancy before divination. But something else that's really important, and something I am guilty of, something I've had to think a lot about, because again, where I'm coming at tarot from an atheist perspective and also a non-magical practitioner perspective, is the tendency to distance ourselves from cartomancy. So here's a section. Instead of combating the derogatory stereotypes of fortune tellers, which are rooted in anti-Roma racism, some professional tarot readers distance themselves from quote-unquote fortune telling and claim that their divination practice is something more spiritual and therapeutic than mere fortune telling. Many marginalized groups have historically used widely accessible playing cards for fortune telling, and this type of cartomancy is typically seen by modern white consumers of reading and decks as inferior to tarot. So using cartomancy for playing cards or whatever. This division between highbrow tarot and lowbrow cartomancy, which is rooted in oppression based on race and class from tarot's beginning, still impacts those who are able to have profitable card reading businesses and who are seen as legitimate and knowledgeable teachers or practitioners of divination today. That is critical, like, to keep in mind as you explore your practices and as you interact with the world. Something that's encouraged in here and quoted from a Romani person. I need to find their name. Jasmina Vantiel, a Romani tarot reader who hosts the Romanist podcast and writes monthly tarot readings for Bustle, says fortune telling became a family trade practice for survival, which is why people get upset when non-Roma capitalize off fortune telling in this way without paying acknowledgement to the community or lifting us up. If you're non-Romani and you're reading fortunes, lift us up in some way, promote Romani readers, donate some of your money to something like Selma Salman's Get the Heck to School, which supports Romani girls in an impoverished village in Bosnia to get education and end this cycle of child marriage. So there's an example in there of how to support the Romani people, but like think about it in more an expansive context of what you are practicing or interested in, and how you can, pass it on, to so to say, or like use your privilege to support those that have engaged in, this as a survival business or survival employment rather than for fun or for a hobby or for self-improvement. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's nothing wrong with using tarot in those ways, and I use them in those ways. But how can you support those that kind of formed those traditions or, got tarot where it is today? So, yeah, this is the history in general is essential reading in my mind, which is why I spent so much time talking about it in here. And those are just a few tastes of all the things you can learn in here. You can learn about the G word slur and how it's shortened from Egyptian because of the assumption that Romani people were from Egypt. And that's also, I don't think it's mentioned in here, but that's also where the word gypped comes from when people say, like, I've been ripped off, I've been gypped by, like, a scammer, because of the stereotype that fortune tellers who were Romani are scamming you and that are, like, sneaky or untrustworthy. Like, all those racist stereotypes, yeah? So, yeah, you gotta read that. If nothing else, check this book out of the library to read that. Okay. Now, when we get to this next section here, something I want to talk about in general. This book, to me, is its own structure. It is not RWS. It's not Thoth. It's not Marseille. It is numerology based, but it has like astrology in there. And instead of tarot in a linear fashion, here's the numerology piece, which I think Lane Smith attributes to, I think it's Mary Kay Greer, but I'm trying to find the actual attribution. But it attributes sort of like the lines of tarot that are used in this book and the format. So I struggled with this because 10s are lumped in with 1s and the majors are in a certain order and get reduced down. So your wheel is a 1, your sun is a 10, which is a 1. And I like, for me, numerology is kind of a hassle because there is like an actual way in math that you do reduction, which is not the same as how people do it in numerology. And people do it in numerology different ways and to different degrees. So this way kind of doesn't really work for my brain, which is a me thing, not a this is an issue with the book thing. But I thought you should be aware of that. The way that Smith talks about tarot is as a sphere, which is really cool. A total different system. And honestly, as legitimate and as valid as any of the other ones. And something I feel is full and vibrant. And if it's something you're interested in embracing, go for it. But be aware that there is that in here. And don't be like, this isn't RWS. This doesn't make sense. This isn't aligned with Thoth or whatever. And I don't know if the decans are used or whatever, but there's a lot of astrology and astrological associations in here. And that's not my vibe, just because I don't have any astrological correspondences with tarot and don't want them. So again, a me thing. So when we would get to sections where, let me pull up an example. So for example, here's the page on judgment, and it talks about the astrological association. My eyes would just glaze over when we would get to the astrology piece, because it just didn't work for me. But that is a small element of the book, and it leads me to my first main critique of the book. And again, that's just the format. And I think section 1 makes total sense. But with section 2, let me go to the table of contents and show you what I mean. Instead of being ordered in order of the typical linear tarot system, because again, this is its own thing. So it starts with a Fool, and then it goes into the ones, but see, Magician, Wheel, and Sun, and then the minors for 1, and then 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s and 6s. I think what would have been more helpful for my brain and made it a little easier, and I don't know if others are the same, is if the majors went from 0 to 22, but in the corner or something, it noted the astrology and it noted the numerology, rather than structuring and lumping all the majors in to the numerology of 1 through 9. But the minors could have been lumped 1 through 9. It just is a little bit more straightforward. One of my reasonings behind this is because the majors, and it's interesting because Lane Smith even talks about this, how there were 16 initially, and we've had, some added since then, and before the 16, there were also a specific set of virtues in a poem. So how did we get to the 22 major arcana we know? You know what I mean? And because justice is not always at 8 or 11, sometimes strength is there and they swap because of the system differences. I don't think you can really put the majors neatly into numerology. Again, if you have a set way you do the cards, you can then put a set way to organize your majors numerologically. But because they have moved around throughout history versus the very sort of stable 1 through 10 minors, which is where tarot even got its origins, right? Because Mamluk cards started in the 1 through 10 with the quartz, and then eventually trumps were added once it got to Italy. For me, the trumps are more nebulous archetypes that don't lump well into the numbers. So I would love to hear others' thoughts on if you use numerology around the majors. I think a lot of folks do. It's not something I typically dig into, and I also let it be its own thing depending on the decks, because there are decks with rearranged majors or with different historical arrangements of majors. So that is the thing that kind of threw me off in this book. I wish the majors were pulled out, and they could have been last, and the numerology first to prioritize that and get you in that mindset and thinking. But the majors going out of order and then also being referred to as a sphere, but only in this first portion, it would have been helpful. So maybe organize them like this in the book, but instead they're all just lumped in with the minors. So that's kind of hard. It was hard to read it that way. So I ended up flipping around in the book so that they would still be read in order for my brain to make sense of it. So it's such a minor critique, though, is just the layout of the book, because you can read it in whatever order you want, just flip back. The sections that introduce the numbers were really good. Acts of initiation and this. And then the twos. Let's get to the twos. acts of alignment. Acts of care, I think, are 3s. Yeah. These are really good. I think it would have been kind of neat if these sections were in the previous chapter instead of in the cards. Have the explanation you have about tarot as a sphere, explain your numerology, and then go 1 through 10, or in this case 1 through 9, and explain your thinking on the format of numerology, and then go into the cards in order. But that's just me. So, where this book really shines, the best part of this book, the history is really good, but the best part of this book are the meanings of the cards. So, you get, we'll look at a major and we'll look at a minor. Let's start with the major. So, the Emperor. You get an action. You get sort of like the archetype and concepts of emperorness. You get the ties in to the numerology and to the astrology. And then you get a real world example in history on social justice tied to the meaning of the card. This is the best part of the book. And each card gets that, the minors and the majors. You get a real life example, and then you get these incredible reflection questions that are after that. I want just this as a little guidebook to have and refer to. It's so good. It's so well done. Every choice is really well picked for each card. It really helps the cards come alive, and it helps you see the card in liberation, in politics, in a solidarity way. Okay, so now let's look at a minor. So you still get an action, 4 of Wands, join a rally. You then get, and the elements. You get the element, you get the numerology. It explains why this action. Protesting isn't a tool. If you expect it to be a direct action to stop what's happening, it doesn't work. It's not that. Protesting doesn't dismantle or disarm. It isn't carefully honed arguments. That's not what it's for. It's to build morale. It's to show solidarity. It's to let those who are suffering know that people care. Like, it has like the concept of the 4 of Wands, and it ties it into a real life social thing. I don't think there are historical... No, there are. Not always, maybe. So, like, for the minors, it might not be like, here is one specific historical event that occurred that feels very 4 of Cups-y. It's more just like a concept. So, civil disobedience, it ties that into the card. And then in this example, there's an example from Lane Smith's life and a civil disobedience action that they experienced, and how they, made a mistake with their decision to how they engaged in it, and put a friend at risk, and what they learned from that. It's so good. So yeah, there's the actions are really alive in the minors. And then the majors have these big historical events. Here's the Hierophant and the 1980s Sanctuary Movement, and how that is Hierophant energy. Really, 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 really good. I loved this part of the book. This is the part I think will resonate with most people, will really make tarot feel alive to you, and will help you see how there are indeed 78 acts of liberation in here, and how when you pull that tarot card, when you pull the 5 of Swords, how, if you want to, do you look at it in a context of collective liberation, social justice, and a progressive political worldview. And it's empowering to take a tarot card and help you explore that aspect of humanity with it. And this is my favorite part of the book. And it gives you fresh perspectives on certain card tropes. I'm trying to think of a good example. Like if we go to the 3 of Swords, let's see. 3 of Swords. So it's iconic. It talks about the RWS imagery. It can talk about like what typically the way people read it, and then Lane Smith's perspective on how you could read it. unlearning assumptions and then tying that into that. And it really helps make the cards more expansive. And not in a way that you're like, oh, that doesn't align with the meaning at all. Even though you could argue, RWS, Thoth, Marseille, they all don't align with each other's meanings. Tarot is made up. You can make it up how you want. And this is a great way to use it. And this is a great made up, beautiful structure. Truly excellent. And like I said, I would love to purchase a tiny version of this book that's just the card meanings so that I can refer again and again and remind myself without having to wade through the sort of unwieldy organization of this book. Maybe what I'll do is I'll buy an ebook version of it and then cut it up into pieces in the PDF and make it a little guide for myself, because it's just really well done. What else do I want to say about the book? Oh yeah, let me go to the section after tarot history. And back to the tarot structure piece here. This is a great spread, by the way. It takes the Hanged One. It keeps Traitor, rather than the I don't know, more like nice washed or spiritual interpretation of the Hanged One. And it says, look, okay, but what if you are a traitor against something bad? How can you be a traitor to society that helps the greater good? So that's kind of neat. But this is what I wanted to talk about here. Page 52, they break down the elements. And I was excited to see that their favorite suit, or their favorite element, is fire. My favorite suit is wands, and it really felt validating and exciting because I'm also a community organizer by profession and really need that fire. And that's why I connect with it. And so I love just how they interpret fire and translate it into action. And then I really like the, again, reflection questions for wands, cups, swords, and pentacles. Because again, you can take these little snippets and help them, or use them to help your practice grow. It's not, you don't have to just memorize this whole book and then read tarot a new way. It's a really great reflection tool. Yes, also Mary Kay Greer is the person who was quoted on the numerological groupings. Sorry, I couldn't find that earlier. Not on page 58, when it talks about the majors, before it gets into Tarot's Sphere, it critiques the Fool's Journey, and it's something I really appreciated as somebody who doesn't really identify or like the Fool's Journey either. It talks about how, there's this argument that it's a monomyth, right? From Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, because it's the hero's journey is where the Fool's Journey came from. There are criticisms from folklorists who observe Campbell's selected interpretive stories that fit into his preconceived notions, and that the hero's journey might not hold true for every person and culture, and how tarot doesn't have to be linear. Even though I'm over here whining that it's not in order for my brain in the majors, I kind of was like, they could be in any order, but not mixed in with the minors because it was harder for me to read it. But that's also why I don't want to give numerological values to each one, because I don't view them as necessarily in any order officially, So I really like this, just, untangling the Fool's Journey and thinking about how your life doesn't necessarily go in the order that is the classic Fool's Journey story, because that never meshed with me. And then after it goes into Tarot's Sphere, it talks about tarot readings and how how we might experience tarot readings. And something that I loved was they mentioned where they live, a group of Black queer tarot readers in Baltimore started a group called Solidarity Tarot, and how that was used. And I love that idea and would love to see little tarot solidarity groups pop up all over. Like that would be a way you could take this book and realize it and connect with others in person. But then also, this whole section here is for if you are a sole practitioner, you're by yourself, you do things solo, you don't really have others where you live in person or online. And if you practice it mostly for yourself, and you don't really read for others, there are some prompts and questions for incorporating politics and justice into your own practice that I think are really useful. Again, a little like bite-sized way to start realizing the concepts of this book into your practice or into the world. The last critique I will offer is in the end are the court cards. I really like the renaming, cohort cards. That's clever, because it is a cohort of like personalities or concepts or however you want to kind of think about the courts. I typically call them face cards, so I like how that's mentioned as well. My critique is that for me, although I liked the messengers, drivers, alchemists, and dancers, those are like what Lane Smith renames the cohorts or like looks at them as. What I'm missing in this section is tying each card, so the Page of Cups, to the messenger. Because it just talks about, in one paragraph, the messengers as the pages, and that's it. It doesn't break down each of the four and how they're different and how they might align. Just like how all of the twos are broken down and you can understand each piece of each suit. So you could take the cohorts and then you could take the little section at the beginning on elements and put them together and get a meaning for each one. But I would have really liked to see a little section for each page, each knight, each queen, each king, rather than just talking about them as one cohort. That's just me. I felt like that was really the only thing in this book missing for me that I would have liked to see, is just like a deeper dive on each of the cohort cards. So yeah, that's the book. Here's Lane Smith. You should go buy this book. You should get this book out of the library. You should read it and share it, however you want to do it, in a way that's accessible to you. I highly recommend this book for anyone into tarot, and especially anyone looking for a modern tarot worldview. Again, like I said, it's kind of its own system, but you, just like with any other system, can take or leave what you want out of it. For me, I'm going to leave behind the numerology and the astrology. I might take the nonlinear aspect of the majors, but I don't know if I'll necessarily take the sphere. I love the elemental and numerological thoughts on the minors, and I like the minors are prioritized just as much as the majors and not secondary. And there's even a little paragraph, I think, in here where Lane Smith talks about how that happens and how, rather than looking at the majors as important and the minors as not important, look at them as wide perspective and more narrow perspective. For me, the way I look at it is the majors are more nebulous archetypes, like I said, and the minors are more real and, like, honestly easier for me to connect to. The hardest thing for me in tarot to learn was remembering the meanings of the majors. I understood the courts way before I understood the majors. So that's 78 Acts of Liberation, Tarot to Transform Our World by Lane Smith. I really enjoyed it. My two minor critiques were just the structure of the book and sort of a little bit not enough detail for me for the court cards. Everything else was a win for me, and it's really good. It's definitely worth rereading. I'm going to gift this to somebody else to let them love it, but might end up getting another copy, or it might come back around to me in some way. But yeah, I love this book. I would love to know your thoughts. I'd love to know if you've read it and what you think about the format and what you think about the history section. Like I said, the other book that has a really neat section on history is Tarot for Pregnancy, which is mentioned in here somewhere. And I think that if you can't get or don't really have a reason to get the Tarot for Pregnancy book, and like, I'll be honest, after I had my first baby, I was like, I don't need this book anymore. Even though I'm pregnant now, I don't think I would reread it. But the history piece is really good. And there is a podcast, which I will link in the description, from In Search of Tarot is the name of the podcast. And the interview is with the author of that piece of the book. And I need to find it so that I can tell you their name. Here it is. Sanyu Estelle Nagenda. I must be mispronouncing that. Wrote the detailed history on the Mamluk cards in her section of Tarot for Pregnancy, which is written by Brittany Carmona Holt. And she talks about how the 4 suited playing cards form the basis of the majors. It's really good. I will put the link to that interview in the description, but also if you can, read that section. She has also said she would be writing additional things on tarot, but not, immediately. So keep an eye out, follow her, look her up, and you might get some more really cool tarot history that way. But yeah, I really liked this book. Thanks so much for sticking around, if you did, for this very long review. I said it was going to be in depth because I had a lot of thoughts. Go read this book. Thanks so much for watching, and take care.